Hello Game fans, we were again spoiled for choice in August, so here are the picks of potential games of the year mixed in with hidden gems, beginning with Akimbot, a 3D action platformer from a behind-the-back camera angle about an outlaw robot and his sidekick fighting their way through the universe in order to save it from certain doom. Parallels have been drawn between this game and classic titles like Ratchet & Clank and Jak and Daxter, down to the action and the two characters playing off against each other. With this kind of game being somewhat of a rarity these days, so get it if you love the genre, with this coming to us from the developer of Pumpkin Jack, which is worth a play as well. Just a quick one here in Cat Bait, a variant on the Vampire Survivors style Bullet Heaven roguelite, in which you are still being mobbed by swarms of enemies, but it's a dodge 'em up instead since you cannot attack. This is done indirectly through helper cats, which fire off their attacks onto the battlefield, so all you need to do is focus on staying alive and not getting hit, being a refreshing twist on the formula that fans of the subgenre should check out. This video is brought to you by Light Odyssey, a boss rush Souls-like title that finds you at the end of the world, having to battle gigantic colossi in order to restore light to the world. This is a grimdark boss rush action title with inspiration from Dark Souls and Shadow of the Colossus, combining intentional combat with absolutely gigantic foes for quite the thrilling experience. There will be more than 11 giant bosses to encounter in this game, each with their own unique attack patterns and abilities, in which you need to learn their movements in order to successfully defeat them in combat. If you manage to interpret the world's unknown glyphs or to complete a puzzle, you will be rewarded with new abilities and weapons, and to gain more knowledge about the secrets of the world. One of the key things that stood out to me here are the various symbols that this trailer shows, which I'm guessing is some sort of hidden language that you need to decipher, so it's a world with plenty of secrets that should be fun to explore. Another highlight is the dynamically changing battlefields, where boss fights are not just confined to one area, but also one particularly claustrophobic tunnel or cave seen in this trailer, so there's more to this game than meets the eye. The size discrepancy between the player character and bosses does also result in some pretty satisfying combat, where you dodge to get out of the way and then find the right window to land your attack, all with some pretty epic sounding music which complements the visuals. On a personal note, I actually saw this game during Gamescom Asia 2023, here's a photo for proof, as well as a link to the video on the event, and thought that it looked awesome both in terms of visuals based on light and dark, but also the boss rush action, and it did win the Creativity Award at the event, so if interested, wishlist the game on Steam via the link in the description below. From the lead designer of Fruit Ninja and Jetpack Joyride comes Feed the Deep, an exploration-focused roguelite that borrows the resource gathering aspect of Dome Keeper, in which you are diving in, gathering these, bringing them back up to spend on an upgrade so that you can dive even deeper. So far, so standard. However, there is an eldritch horror element to this game, since there is a monster in the deep which needs to be sated in order to protect the cities on the surface of the water, with some gameplay variety in the form of mini-games as well. While a roguelite, there isn't that much replayability here, clocking in at about 3 hours on average, so it's a small experience that would be a good palate cleanser. The release of Mika and the Witch's Mountain kind of surprised me, not necessarily in the best way, since this had a tremendous amount of hype off their hugely successful Kickstarter campaign, which raised 1.3 million euros, and seems like that has not translated into sales since it has only 130 Steam reviews as of recording. However, there are many reviews which are not counted by Steam, since these were backer keys, where I'm guessing that their initial Kickstarter already had so many backers that they made their money upfront, so to speak. This is a cozy exploration adventure game where you play as a witch, delivering packages on a broom or on foot, where flying around the island and exploring parts of it is pretty charming. I suspect the early access release had to do with its moderate instead of blowout success, since while the main story content is complete, they are planning to add mini-games, side missions, dungeons, and the ability to pet animals and more, which I would have framed as content patches to the base completed game instead of early access, but still a neat little game worth a look. A game which got a little bit of a blowback is Castaway, since this 2D Zelda-looking game seemed impressive on the surface, which led to people expecting way more for this game, but what they got was a super short, maybe 30-minute main adventure before they were asked to attempt the challenging 50-floor tower with increasing levels of difficulty. In fairness though, the developer in the marketing around this game has repeatedly stated that this is a small game using micro-dungeons to describe the 3 dungeons for example, but as is always the case with Steam reviews, it's more of a matter to do with player expectations versus reality, so expectations were not properly set in this case. Still, me being me, the pixel art is a highlight and I'm always down for 2D Zelda style games, so it gets a thumbs up from me. This next title was also quite the surprise to me, since while it looks relatively unimpressive, Dale and Dawson Stationery Supplies is essentially Among Us but The Office, only where you're not killing your colleagues, with slackers trying to look busy and the manager having to weed them out, with the rest of the players deemed specialists who are actually trying to get work done, being a refreshing take on the genre. This next title might be not so indie, but I do like seeing bigger companies making pixel art games in 2024 and want to encourage that. Can you imagine if the next Pokemon or Final Fantasy game is in pixel art, which is why Shadow of the Ninja Reborn gets a mention, a remake of an 8-bit game on the NES from 1990, so that's a full 34 years if anyone is counting, giving it all new visuals and even a 6th entirely new stage. I did not play the original, but appreciate this game for what it is, since the action platforming is solid as you use your ninja weapons to take out the enemies. I have not tried the co-op, but that looks fun as well, and my god, this game sure is easy on the eyes, so if anyone working at a bigger company is listening, more of this please. The cool thing about gaming is that anything is possible, like in the previous game, of titles getting remastered 34 years later, with the best part about being an indie game fan is that even if the original IP holders are not willing to make a new entry in the same style, indie developers will gladly fill the void, and such is the case with Kitsune Tails. This is of course very Super Mario Bros. 3 in nature, being a 2D platformer but with a Japanese mythology theme. There are different playable characters, each with their own special abilities, and while the writing might not be for everyone, the gameplay alone is solid enough to warrant a recommendation.
Now it's time for payback!
I think that city builders are secretly one of the best genres to make games in, since players can really be fanatical about games like this, with MEMORIAPOLIS starting things off on the right foot. This is a city builder on an epic scale as you attempt to keep it standing and expanding over 2,500 years, from the age of antiquity to that of enlightenment, although the current version only has the first two in antiquity and the Middle Ages. It is vaguely historically accurate, but the trailer shows that you can build wonders in this game, somehow being able to have both the Leaning Tower of Pisa and Windsor Castle constructed in the same city, as you attempt to gain the status of the capital of capitals. This is pretty solid so far, with minimal reports of bugs and the game being broken, with the longer time horizon leading to interesting decisions since roads that you built years ago will affect the efficiency in the current day. But yes, the city builder genre is still well and alive in 2024. Here's a game which, on paper, has the potential to be huge, since Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers is also a gambling-adjacent roguelite deck builder, only instead of poker or slots, this is blackjack instead. The difference between scores will result in damage to your opponent, so for example, if you have 18 and the opponent goes bust, you will then deal 18 damage, and back and forth you go until one player reaches 0 health. There are of course weird cards with special modifiers, and even the base suits have special abilities, but the issue is that it's hit or stand and you are drawing one card at a time, so it feels like there isn't that much strategy involved, which is my main issue with the game, but still I think it's neat and worth a look. The sequel to a stealth action title from 2021 is Intravenous 2, one that seems to have some Hotline Miami inspiration, but with its own twist, since it's a top-down action title but allows you to go stealthy in addition to going loud. This is a more refined version of the concept in the original and introduces a new character for a dual protagonist setup. It is very well made, has a variety of weapons and options, and even multiple endings depending on your choices, being worth a play.
In a world of peace and tranquility.
Like Mika and the Witch's Mountain, I expected Squirrel with a gun to sell many more copies than what the current Steam review numbers estimates, although it is not too shabby by any means. But this game has gone viral multiple times in the past, so maybe something is not adding up. Following in the footsteps of Goat Simulator, this is a cheeky animal mayhem physics simulator in which your objective is to collect acorns. Interestingly, there are puzzle and platforming challenges to complete, which gives you more acorns, most of which do not involve the guns at all, although they are there for you to do battle with the secret agents. This is not an early access release, and the developer has plans to add free content updates to the game, which should make it even better, so for a weird, fun, light-hearted experience, this is your game for the month. SteamWorld Heist II is the sequel to the most underrated SteamWorld game, with the Metroidvania-ish SteamWorld Dig series being far and away the most popular, but this side-scrolling, turn-based tactical title is awesome and should be played. Think XCOM but with manual aiming, so you don't have to worry about percentage chance to hit. Rather, it becomes a skill issue if your ricochet fails and you miss the enemy. There's a nice variety of guns, characters, and special abilities, with the nautical theme being a nice parallel to the spaceships in the original, and it's a relatively fresh take on the genre. Speaking of fresh takes, an underrated pixel art title is Arco, having a very unique combat system which is turn-based, but where your commands are executed simultaneously and in real time. This leads to interesting strategic implications, since you do need to lead your shots and to anticipate what your enemies are going to do when planning your own attacks, resulting in a very interesting dynamic to wrap your head around. Of course, the pixel art here is a highlight, contrasting the minimalist look of the characters with some absolutely gorgeous and detailed backgrounds and environmental objects, where it is usually the opposite in other games, which makes this visually interesting. The revenge-driven story is good as well, that harkens back to Western cowboy cinema and is the definition of a hidden gem. If you're an indie developer, you can look for gaps in the market of successful games but putting just enough of your own spin on things, and you might just end up with a modestly successful game instead of a flop, and such is the case with Dawn of Defiance, essentially Valheim but with Greek instead of Norse mythology. Indeed, you are doing survival crafting game stuff like punching trees and mining to get resources to build your base and craft new equipment, using these to venture further out into the wilderness to get better materials and so on, encountering and battling monsters along the way. A little bit of an immersion breaking part is that your character can fly for some reason, which definitely helps in the base building, but it's not exactly realistic, but I'll give that a pass for now. Being an early access title, it has a good foundation with good systems, but is lacking in content. But given the estimated sales figures so far, I think that it will keep the developers motivated enough to continue to work on this. Although maybe I wouldn't recommend buying it right now, since you know how early access games can be abandoned, so I wouldn't take the risk.
When you reach the mysterious tower, your journey begins.
Another awesome entry in the roguelite inventory management subgenre is Mega Loot, being a more streamlined version of the concept since placement of items in your backpack relative to the other items isn't a thing as compared to something like Backpack Hero. Rather, you are purchasing equipment and equipping these before simply hitting an attack button to lay the smackdown on your enemies, but of course, enchantments, set bonuses and more is where the strategy comes in. I like it for the more minimalist approach to the genre, while still having enough strategic depth and combos to be interesting, with variety here mainly in the form of the 10 playable characters, but does not offer much in terms of meta progression.
Hunter.
Ahoy, mateys!
Unsurprisingly, Cat Quest III makes the list since this is an excellent Zelda-style action-adventure title and is pretty much what I expected based on the first two games, but with a little bit of a different theme here. Rather than generic medieval fantasy, this third entry has a pirate theme with matching pirate puns, which sees our swashbuckling cat going on adventures in search of treasure. It's a familiar feeling while still having enough new stuff to be interesting, like naval combat and more open exploration, and it's a good game as expected, although not pushing too far or doing anything too crazy. Now this title came out of nowhere since Vladik Brutal is a Half-Life-like first-person shooter coming to us from a solo developer no less, set in a nameless Eastern European country in which you are fighting back against a dictator. It is not all historical gritty realism since there are mutant creatures, zombie-type enemies, giant bosses and more, but the fact is that the action and weapon variety is awesome enough to push this game over the edge. It has a little bit of that Stalker or Metro feel to the environmental design of the desolation and bombed out buildings that those games are known for, with the action slanting a little bit more towards the pace of Call of Duty rather than being slow and methodical. Still, amazing work, and it is games like this that make me love covering indie games. It is not easy to do humor in games, but the developers at Cold Supper managed to pull it off with Thank Goodness You're Here, which is set in a very bizarre northern English town and is very British indeed. It is one part adventure game with some platforming sections where you play as a tiny travelling salesman helping the locals, having an amazing look, animation and plenty of laughs. Recommended. On the surface, Fields of Mystria looks like a Stardew Valley clone, which was why it was surprising to me with the amount of hype of it pre-release, and the fact that post-early access launch, it seems to have sold a stupid number of copies as well, so of course I was intrigued. There isn't anything too crazy in terms of core systems, art style or even theme, since it is not sci-fi for example, rather being very Stardew Valley-like in many aspects, but the key here is quality of life. For example, you can save the game in the middle of the day if you need to stop playing, rather than being forced to complete the day, and also has a global inventory system when crafting, so you don't need to worry about what you are currently carrying. As such, this dials up the friendliness and coziness of the game, and it's just good vibes all around, with this being the standout release in the genre so far this year. Of course, the heart wants what the heart wants since Crypt Custodian is very much my jam, a 3/4 view action-adventure game with Metroidvania elements, even having the addition of platforming and jumping, which is not typical for a game like this. You play as a cat in the afterlife who has been sentenced to be its janitor forever, having to explore and clean up the place while making friends with the other ghosts in the process. It feels great to play and is cleverly designed with fun Metroidvania abilities, and like the developer's previous title, Isolates is an underrated hidden gem. Very pleasantly surprised to see the success of Shapes 2, a factory builder which is the sequel to Shapes, releasing on Steam in 2020, but first started off live as an .io game where you can play it in browser right now for free, so check that out if you're curious. The sequel ditches the ultra minimalist look for a 3D environment, but even this is rather abstract, with your sheep constructing factory floating in space, seemingly unencumbered by physics itself. allowing you to construct multi-level factories with no limit on size or shape. It is still a relatively simple look, but my god, this game is a factory builder fan's dream, since while you are still creating abstract shapes and not producing anything specific like iron or steel, the core min-maxing of the factory layout is present and is the appeal of the game. They are planning for a number of major updates through early access, which is planned for at least 6 months, and as fans of the genre will know, this is fairly common among factory builders, with the core experience already being excellent. Of the new releases of the month, the one that stood out is Tactical Breach Wizards, coming to us from the developer of Gunpoint and Heat Signature, and while this is a different kind of game, still has the quality that this developer is known for. Interestingly, this is a tactical RPG, so you have unique characters rather than disposable grunts like in XCOM, with a time rewind mechanic so you can right those wrongs if your characters end up dead. You're controlling a group of tactical wizards, hunting down another rival crew, with your band of misfits growing on you as the game progresses. While the turn-based tactical action is all well and good with fun magic and spells, to me, the highlight is the humorous writing and characters, and while it is a linear, level-based, almost puzzle game, this is worth every penny. One of the best roguelite titles also released out of early access in the pachinko roguelite Peglin. If you are not familiar, once upon a time, there was a game named Peggle by PopCap Games, now under the Electronic Arts banner, that was one of the biggest games ever, managing to capture a little bit of that casual audience since the concept is simple: aim and fire a ball and watch it hit pegs, some of which have special powers, and then to see what happens, with the last entry in the Peggle series being in 2014. With this indie developer bringing it back in a new form. You have special balls that interact with the pegs in different way, all in service of generating damage, which you then use to attack enemies at the top of the screen. There's also a randomized roguelite style map with treasure, shops, random events, mini-boss fights and more, and while technically 1.0, the developers have plans to continue to add free content to this game, but now's as good a time as any to jump in. Speaking of 1.0 releases, what did I tell you? Core Keeper was and is one of the best things going on in indie games at the moment, a sandbox crafting game in the vein of Terraria, but with a different camera angle, where you are fighting monsters and gathering resources to upgrade your base and to craft better equipment so that you can explore new and more dangerous areas. There are so many systems like automation, vehicles, and even the ability to keep pets, and with multiplayer support for up to 8 players, can be fun with friends as well, and is one of the best games in this space. Watch this video for more of the best pixel art indie games.